I am now going to call on Jacob Dexter to speak from Rock Around the Blockade. I'll hand the floor to you, Jacob. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, so I'm speaking as a member and supporter of Rock Around the Blockade, which is a campaign in support of socialist Cuba founded by the Revolutionary Communist Group. I think if I could summarize the main political takeaway that I've received from the speeches that we've heard so far tonight, it's that, you know, Cuba is under attack in a new way, using new methodologies, using new techniques and strategies, but also in the old way, in that this has been true of Cuba's history since the revolution. And we need to understand why it's necessary for imperialism to attack Cuba. Helen just touched on it just now. But, you know, it is politically necessary for this shining example of socialism that achieves so much, even as it is under attack every single day. It's politically necessary for imperialism to attempt to destroy that example. You know, if you picture, obviously this is true of imperialist countries all around the world, but if you picture this from the United States perspective, you know, they have this island, you know, a few miles off their coastline where all of this is happening. And that example cannot be presented to the working class of the United States. An example of real working class power cannot be presented to their people because, you know, it could be a brilliant influence on them. And that's not just true of the United States. Cuba presents an alternative to capitalism to the working class of the entire world. And that example and sharing that example has to be an integral part of working class struggle wherever we are. No matter what country we live in, we have to use that example as part and in support of working class struggles where we are. Obviously, Rock Around the Blockade is a British organization, so we have to kind of take that perspective. Cuba has very few allies in this country, in Britain. Left-leaning organizations like the Socialist Workers' Party present a chauvinistic and a counter-revolutionary position on Cuba and the Cuban Revolution. For them, Cuba didn't do things according to their template of revolution that was devised by them, as they kind of look down from their ivory tower and judge the Cuban Revolution to be wanting. Of course, their template for revolution assumes that it can only proceed through an alliance with social imperialists in organizations like the Labour Party and opportunistic trade unions. I don't remember who said this to me, but it stuck with me very strongly. You know, for these kind of chauvinists that exist all across the world, not just in Britain, but for these chauvinists, imperialists and opportunists never do stuff or never do a thing that is bad enough that they lose their support. You know, the Labour Party, for example, has never done anything bad enough to lose the support of these chauvinistic people. But countries and people engaging in actual socialist struggles can never do good enough to earn their support. That stuck with me, and I think that's very true. Cubans face a lot of challenges in the current period, and their exemplary response to, oh, sorry, I skipped a bit in my notes, my mistake. Cubans face many challenges in the current period. Sort of most prominently at the moment, and one that I think presents an important example, is their exemplary response to the COVID-19 pandemic, which has been hindered at every single turn by the blockade and by imperialist propaganda. In spite of that, they're doing well. Helen touched on it very succinctly, so I won't go into detail. But the proof is in the pudding with Cuba's amazing healthcare infrastructure that continues to this day to prove that socialism can provide a genuine solution to these, huge global problems. It's no coincidence that COVID-19 has hit imperialist countries like the United States and Britain in a more devastating manner than it has hit countries like Cuba. So in the spirit of inspiring resistance, just gonna pull up some examples of the resistance that we are organizing in Britain right now. Some of these pictures are a bit small. I apologize for that. At its core, capitalism and capitalist organization is incapable of resolving problems like poverty, inequality, and economic underdevelopment. In fact, those issues are inherent to how capitalism functions. They're inherent to how imperialism functions. And so we can't resolve those problems without a complete overthrow of that system, without seeking an alternative. And Cuba's struggle against imperialism and the formation of a socialist society is an inspiration to everyone around the world fighting for freedom, democracy, and social justice. Cuba shows us that problems like poverty, inequality, and economic underdevelopment can be solved within a socialist framework. And that's why imperialists are determined to destroy it, to destroy that example. And it's why we have to be determined to defend it, no matter where we are, no matter for what we are struggling. We have to point to Cuba's shining example and make that connection relevant. I live in Birmingham, and we've been doing this for the past few, well, obviously, the history of our organization is full of street work and solidarity with Socialist Cuba. But in the past few months, it's been a lot easier. I found it a lot easier to relate the question of Cuba's example to working class people in this country. People are hungry for an alternative. People are hungry for that example, and we need to bring it to them. I think it's important to make the point, though, that obviously, whilst we have to use social media and we have to kind of counter this social media war that Cuba is facing right now, we have to follow the example of the thousands of ordinary Cubans who on July 11th, on the day of those anti-government protests, took to the streets in defense of their revolution as well. And in the following days, there were several more of these, mass demonstrations. We need to look to that example as well and respond to attacks on socialist Cuba in the streets where people actually are. I'll leave it at that.